Hello everyone, welcome to the Urbanism Hour. Before we move forward, I just want to share with you a bit of housekeeping rules. Please note that we will be recording the session and the video will be then later on available on the Academy's YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be recorded, just keep your cameras turned off. If you have any questions or comments during the session for our speakers, please feel free to add all the questions in the chat box, and then our chair will go through them and you will be invited to join the discussion at the end after the speakers have presented. Next week, we are invited to join the Networks and Magnets conference, where we're gonna examine what are the factors that enable the small and medium-sized cities to grow and thrive. We also want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to put together all these activities. So we are grateful for their support. And if you want to learn more about the Academy and how you could get further involved, please feel free to go online and learn more about our membership types. So without further ado, I will now stop my share and hand it over to Alistair Barr, who is the Academy's director, and he's chairing the session today, and he will be able to provide with more information about the session and the two speakers. Alistair, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Olga. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be a really interesting hour. I think the title, the overall title is 5G testbeds for economic and social growth in West London. I've just been chatting to the two people you're going to hear from. I've seen their slides. There's some amazing things they're going to talk about. In fact, almost too much to talk about. But so I'm just going to reinforce that idea. Please use the chat function as they're talking. Then I can make sure that when we have the question session, which is going to be around 1:30, that your questions are there. I might call on you to actually ask them face to face. So don't go out and make a cup of tea halfway through. I might be calling your name. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker, who's Bev Archer. And her title is Challenges and Opportunities for Old Oak and Park Royal, Why We're Building a 5G Industrial Testbed. Now, Bev's been working on these projects around there for a long time. So she's working on regeneration proposals for Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Luckily, her email address is just OPDC, because that's too much of a mouthful. But so I'm just going to say OPDC from now on. She leads improvements to transport networks, digital connectivity, energy capacity, employment and skills provision. So a whole wide range of urban issues which she's going to talk about. She also does business engagement, economic development. She's been working for about 15 years in project and program management, and she's got experience in public and private sector, which is like an interesting mix. So she's worked for tech startups and things like that. And she also said to me that she's worked preparing the Mayor of London for public scrutiny meetings. That's definitely the question I'm asking at 1:30. You know, tell us some background of that. Sounds great. So over to you, Bev.
Thanks a lot, Alistair. And thank you for inviting me to come and talk about OPDC. I want to keep to time, so I'm just going to jump straight in. I'm going to start with a brief overview of Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, or OPDC. I'll give an overview of our development ambitions, our industrial regeneration programme, and how our 5G ambitions fit into that programme. And then I'm going to hand over to Rick for the much more kind of technical 5G detail. So Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation was created by the Mayor of London in 2015 to manage the regeneration of the Old Oak and Park Royal opportunity area. This is our opportunity area marked on the map, 650 hectares over in West London. And we were set up because our opportunity area cuts across 3 borough boundaries. So we have Hammersmith and Fulham, Ealing and Brent. And in that situation, the Mayor, if he wants to, can set up one organisation which acts as the local planning authority and also the regeneration agency for that area for the duration of our project, which is roughly 20 to 30 years. This slide really shows how our regeneration project kind of plays a pivotal role in the evolution of West London, and also is part of a much wider sub-regional regeneration programme as well. So next slide, please, Olga. That's okay. Thanks. Our project is really all about connectivity. I'm sorry, if you could go back to one, I think we just skipped one. That's okay, thanks. And there's no better example of placemaking potential created through brilliant transport connections than that provided by the new train station at Old Oak Common. So Old Oak Common will be the only interchange between High Speed 2 coming down from the north, connecting the OPDC area to 8 of the UK's largest cities, and the Elizabeth line, formerly Crossrail, running across London, connecting the OPDC area to Heathrow and central London in 10 minutes. And the connectivity brought about by the new station, combined with the existing transport infrastructure, such as the 6 underground stations that surround our area, the North Circular along the western side, the A40 along the southern side, and the canal running across the northern edge of our opportunity area, is unrivaled. And next slide, please, Olga. So the Mayor has tasked OPDC with seizing this opportunity and bringing forward around 25,000 new homes and around 65,000 new jobs to transform a currently underutilised and deprived area of London into an entrance to the capital and a gateway to the UK and the rest of the world. Next slide, please. This slide shows the areas that are the focus for redevelopment, and they're marked there in blue, and they're mainly in public owned land, and everything in beige and some of the dark pink are the parts of the industrial estate that I work on. Next slide, please, Olga. So this is Park Royal, London's largest industrial estate, home to around 1,700 businesses, 40,000 employees, and around 4,000 residents. And this map in particular really shows the diversity of the businesses in the estate. We have a huge range of sectors and sizes and maturity of businesses, but our 3 largest sectors are probably logistics. We have people like Ocado and Amazon and all the couriers, FedEx, DHL, Royal Mail, Parcel Force. In the food manufacturing side, that's our second biggest probably, and we have people like McVitie's and Charlie Bingham's, as well as lots of very small micro businesses that do catering for events and things like that. And the creative industries is probably our 3rd biggest sector, and that was really grown up through that kind of historical link to BBC Studios over in White City. In our local plan, we set out a mission for the industrial estate, which rests on the 3 pillars of protect, strengthen, and intensify. So protect is all about protecting retained industrial land for industrial uses. Strengthen is about addressing some of the issues that the industrial estate faces right now. So things like poor broadband connectivity, limited power supply, congestion, high levels of crime, the poor appearance of the public realm, I could go on. And intensify is about the future of the industrial estate. So what will it look like in 5, 10, 15 years time? How do we support existing businesses to recover and to grow? But also, how do we attract new businesses and new sectors as well? And to help us achieve that mission, we've created the Industrial Regeneration Programme, which is structured around 4 themes: innovation, infrastructure, business and people, and place. So in the first theme, innovation, we talk about setting the benchmark for the future of industry in London. And we've set ourselves 2 challenges. One is around clean growth, and the other is around 5G. So if you move on to the next slide, please, Olga. With clean growth, we are focused particularly on decarbonising the energy network, and we've set ourselves the long-term goals of 0 carbon, 0 waste and 0 emissions by 2050. And we think we can probably be a bit more ambitious and bring that down to 2040, hopefully, but we just need to do a bit more work before we stick to those ambitions. So those are our long-term ambitions. And in the short term, we're focusing on local area energy planning. So ensuring the industrial estate has sufficient energy capacity to support growth and the uptake of electric vehicles. And we're also setting up a pilot solar scheme, which will be scaled up across the OPDC area and hopefully eventually across West London as well. The other challenge area is 5G. So if you could move to the next slide, please, Olga. Our long-term goals here are around putting Park Royal at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution by establishing a 5G testbed capable of supporting autonomous vehicles, AI and innovation in all sectors. And I'm going to talk about the work that we're doing with Jacobs at the end of the presentation. And then in the short term, our goals here are really just about improving digital connectivity to improve productivity for businesses. Next slide, please. The next theme is infrastructure. And this theme is all about moving towards a low carbon transport network. So we've talked about digital infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and this is about transport infrastructure. And our aims here are really about reducing congestion, improving productivity, encouraging a shift to more sustainable modes of transport, and improving air quality. Next slide, please. Our third theme is business and people. So on the business engagement side, this is all really geared towards getting a better understanding of the 1,700 businesses and 40,000 employees in our area. So understanding the challenges they face and the issues in the estate. Our other focus in this theme is on employment and skills. So supporting the recovery and growth of local businesses, helping local residents and employees access current and future employment opportunities, and then also just connecting local businesses and residents to all of the opportunities that are going to be created by regeneration in our area over the next 30 years. Last year, we set up an employment and skills hub in partnership with the local boroughs, DWP, and West London College. And this year, we are going to be launching a skills sharing platform with a company called Echo. And next slide, please. So the final theme is place, which is about placemaking, promotion, and developing strong, resilient communities. And when we talk about communities here, we're really talking about creating stronger networks in the business community, the employee community, and the resident community, but also how do we connect those communities to each other as well. And we have two programs that we're running at the moment in this theme. One is the Great Places Scheme, which is a program of cultural and community projects celebrating the past, present and future of Park Royal. And the other is our In the Making program, which is a program of community-led public realm projects, typically between kind of £1 million to £4 million smaller projects. And the next slide, please, Olga. So finally, I just wanted to finish by outlining the work that we're doing with Jacobs. So we commissioned Jacobs to help us understand how we can establish a 5G testbed in the OPDC area. Jacobs started in January, and the commission that we've put to them is broken down into two stages. So in the first stage, we're asking them to look at the potential. What is possible? What is achievable? Who can help us deliver it? All of those kind of questions. And if at the end of that piece of work, we feel that we have a really viable proposition, stage two is the delivery plan. So what do we need to do now to actually make it happen? And I think for us, the big questions here are how do all of the incredible ideas that Rick and his team introduced us to support and intersect with our ambitions around residential development, economic and industrial regeneration, and also how do they support sub-regional, London-wide and national ambitions as well. And I'm going to leave it there for Rick to go into more detail on the 5G stuff. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Beth.
So let me just introduce you, Rick. That was great. I was thinking, Bev, that my favourite slide was the Park Royal Social with people standing together. Do
you remember those times?
Yeah,
we used to get together.
Nostalgia. That was my favourite slide, definitely. So the next person that's going to speak is Dr. Rick Robinson. He's the Director of Smart Places, Digital Infrastructure and Telecommunications at Jacobs. His Twitter handle is actually Dr. Rick, which I think is really cool. I wish I had a Twitter handle like that. He was telling me he was one of the first people to sign up for Twitter, didn't understand what it was, but he knew he needed a cool Twitter handle. And so if you want to tweet, that's the one to tweet. So his work involves delivering universal connectivity and smart services to cities and communities. Jacobs have disciplines for urban design, to finance, investment, digital technologies, and engineering and operations. His job is to harness all those varied disciplines to create concepts of smart places that have social and economic success. and he's also worked with Arup and IBM, leading their smart cities divisions. So, and he's also the co-founder of what he calls Pivot Projects, who are resilience brokers, and I'm looking forward to asking questions about that as well. So his title is The Evolving Role of Innovation Districts and Testbeds in Creating Economic and Social Values in Cities. So over to you, Rick.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alistair. And if Olga could put the presentation up, great. And just maybe go straight to the first page. Yeah, so this is a bit of pre-COVID background to why this is so important. So at the table on the left is the history over the last 20 years of evolution of the 10 most valuable companies in the world. And something just extraordinary has happened on that list over the past 5 years, with the 7 companies highlighted in orange, which are all tech companies. You could arguably add Tesla to that list, although it's a slightly different company. That they're now collectively worth 10% of global GDP. I mean, that's not quite an apples to apples comparison, but it's an astonishing order of valuation. It basically says if you wanted to buy those 10 companies, you'd need 10% of everything produced in the world for the last year. That's a phenomenal level of growth and a phenomenal speed of growth. But also what they're doing is really interesting. The companies over on the left in 2005 highlighted a sort of a lighter yellow shade of color because they are traditional technology companies that sell products and services. An example of the difference between then and now would be in about 2006, I think it was 2007, Microsoft acquired LinkedIn. They acquired a social network, which they then began to monetize transactions within. That's the business model that Facebook have, selling apps, enabling third-party developers to sell apps, selling advertising space. It's what Google does. And these markets have spread into more and more sectors, Uber, Airbnb, Deliveroo, all examples of this. And there's many, many more. The transactions that form the base of the world economy are increasingly organized and carried out in these online marketplaces. That's something that simply didn't happen around the turn of the century. So something is really changing significantly in the global economy. And as I said, this was a pre-COVID trend. We've had 18 months of acceleration of digitalization since. Could you move on to the next slide, please, Olga? Thank you. And just to touch then on some social and environmental factors as well. So the graph on the left is global carbon dioxide emissions. They fell about 6% last year as we shut the world economy down under lockdown for COVID-19. And that's probably the biggest economic hit in anyone's living memory. If we're going to hit our net zero carbon goals, we have to achieve a 7% drop every year foreseeable future without tanking the world economy. That's an immense challenge. There's obviously going to be a lot of things that contribute to that, but using digital technology to create viable circular economy businesses where we reuse things rather than recycle them or throw them away, and all sorts of others are certainly going to be part of it, as well as probably some sort of sustained increase in remote working over what we were doing before. Not perhaps a complete reversal. The other piece on the right is the social point. Before COVID, there was lots of work done predicting the automation of tasks in employment. And my sort of anecdotal averaging out of it all was saying that over the next 20 to 30 years, about 30% of the activities that constitute jobs today will be automated by technology. The World Economic Forum at the end of last year massively upped the game on that. They now think 44% of skills will be automated by 2025 in just 4 years' time. That's in large part as a result of the accelerated digitalization we've seen driven by COVID-19 and the lockdown. That's a massive shift in employment. If you look at the transition from the manufacturing economy to the knowledge economy in the last century, that was around about 30–40% of jobs that were affected. And roughly 2/3 of the UK's city had huge, long-lasting economic hits because of the difficulty of adapting to that. Centre for Cities report, Outlook 1901, analysed all of that and looked at the differences between cities that succeeded and those that didn't. And it was a complex picture, but the one overriding common theme that emerged was that the cities that succeeded did so because they were able to give their residents new skills so that they could be employed in an economy where jobs had different skills than they did before. And this has happened to me in my lifetime. I used to spend my time working at IBM getting paid to design large-scale internet infrastructures. I was part of the team that designed the infrastructure for all Bank of Scotland's internet banking applications and others. You by and large don't need to pay people like me to spend months and months doing that anymore. You can just rent some space on a cloud somewhere and it all gets done for you by automated technology that deploys new capacity. So this is going to have a really significant effect. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Olga? So one thing that's happening as a consequence is a huge increase in interest in innovation districts, test beds, etc. So I spent about 5-6 years as a non-exec director at Innovation Birmingham, which was opened as Birmingham Science Park Aston in the cities, and at the time was one of only 3 city centre science parks or innovation zones in Europe. There's now a multitude of them, of course. The top left is Leeds, the top right is Manchester Innovation District, a new regeneration of old university stock in Manchester near the city centre. Bottom left is the Milan Innovation District, which is being built on the old 2012 Expo site. Lend-Lease, the developer there, have really credible ambitions to turn that into a globally relevant centre for entrepreneurialism and innovation. And bottom right is Ashgabat in Turkmenistan. So, you know, around the world, there's increased recognition that economies and communities are going to be successful if they have the technology infrastructure and the ability to provide skills to people and businesses to make the most of it. And I think this is just of enormous importance to places like Old Oak and Park Royal, but really everywhere around the country. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Olga? So what's the role of 5G in all this? So 5G is the, I've been used to saying for the past couple of years, the next generation of cellular communications technology. It's probably fair to say now it's just about the current generation. As a consumer service, it's started to be deployed, and it offers great promise in a number of areas, and it's possibly useful to consider whether it will even create an inflection point. So, you know, just thinking back to my opening chart on the economy, that enormous growth in the value of those technology companies and the enormous growth in these online marketplaces, that the technology that made all that happen was the iPhone, an always on internet device with a touch screen that's really easy to use. It absolutely transformed the demographic of people that would use internet services. I remember at the time Sunderland City Council surveyed their population and their internet usage. And when asked, do you use the internet, something like 2/3 of people replied, yes, I've got the internet. When asked, have you got Facebook, something like 90+% of the population said, oh yes, I've got that on my phone. They didn't think of it as the internet. It was just something they did on their phone. 5G and some of the related technologies have the potential to be that next inflection point and to take our use of digital technology to another level. The capabilities it offers, some of which are obvious, much faster connection speeds, much higher bandwidth. So for instance, that's going to make it feasible to stream video or to stream 3D environments to our mobile phones, and we'll come to what some of that might mean. Lower latency as well, much quicker transmission speeds, and combined with ultra reliability, that might mean it's now safe to use mobile connectivity for safety critical applications, for things like connected and autonomous vehicles. Another point is reduced energy usage and actually the ability to connect many more devices. So anyone who lives in London will be familiar with the challenge of getting a good 4G signal, because there's just only so many mobile phones that 4G can connect with in a given area. 5G will create many, many times more devices that are able to connect. So combined with lower combined with better energy efficiency, that means it's now a viable technology for Internet of Things applications. So to put lots of sensors on physical infrastructure to monitor and control how they're behaving more intelligently. Olga, could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. There's a set of use cases for 5G that are on here, a couple of which I've touched on already. I won't talk through them in detail because we don't have a lot of time, but I'm very happy for these slides to be distributed in advance. One thing that it is important to say is that not all 5G capabilities are here yet. So the only 5G capability that's being rolled out by the consumer networks is enhanced mobile broadband. So this will allow us to stream video much more easily than on 4G, will allow more of us to connect, etc. We don't yet have the ultra reliable low latency technologies for that are still being developed and deployed, and we don't yet have the ability to really support massive machine-to-machine communication through lots of deployed endpoints. Those things are still coming. And this is why actually a test bed such as the old Oakham Park Royal one is still a really useful idea, because we are only just beginning to get to grips with the possibilities for this technology. We're only just beginning to see it being deployed and rolled out. And I think it's really important to find ways to de-risk the adoption and the exploration of technology such as this by businesses everywhere. You know, businesses in a tough time at the moment due to the recession, with many staff on furlough. They're not going to be in a position to invest enormous amounts of resources in uncertain things. And so the role of a test bed is really to de-risk that process and facilitate it, to provide the facilities that make it possible to test what your business might do using 5G, or what your community initiative might do as well, but with some of the facilities provided for you, so you don't have to do all of it yourself. Olga, could we move to the next slide, please? So then just to touch briefly on a couple of the use cases. So, you know, through Zoom, this video won't work perfectly, but hopefully you get the idea. This is the War of the Worlds immersive experience, an installation in London. And what I hope you can see is it's a fascinating mix of elements. It's part theme park ride, it's part theatre, it's part social experience, it's part video game, it's part physical, it's part digital. It mixes all of these elements together to give you an experience that simply has never been possible before the advent of virtual reality technology. I think the link for me with 5G here, and why that creative sector in Old Oakham Park Royal is so fascinated by the possibilities, are 5G has the bandwidth and the latency to get you out into the real world to experience some of this stuff. There was a fascinating demo created by a company called Magic Leap a couple of years ago, and Magic Leap make a pair of augmented reality glasses. So you put them on, they look like pretty thick goggles. You can see through them, so you see the real world, but they record the real world that you're seeing. They can then pass that data back to a server to augment the real world with digital things, present it back to you, and it's projected so that your eyes see it. The demo that they created was a Game of Thrones game. So the idea was that you can, with a group of friends, wherever you are, have a battle with the army of the dead. Again, an experience that could not be created using previous generations of technology. The relevance of 5G is that no other technology has the latency to record what's being seen, send it off for processing, add in the virtual images, the army of the dead, send it back to your goggles quickly enough for your brain to perceive it as one thing. Current generations of technology have a lag, which means if you turn your head, what you're seeing lags, the virtual part lags it, and it induces a sense of nausea. I think the possibilities for this are fascinating. It's the next generation of storytelling. Think of Laser Quest on steroids combined with Fortnite. It could even be that this is a part of how we reinvigorate town centres. You know, this sort of experience is not something you can easily reproduce in your home with your own goggles. It's a different thing than that. That's why I like the social element of it as well. Olga, could we move to the next page, please? Thank you, and I'm nearly done now, so hopefully I'm going to finish roughly on time. Bev also mentioned manufacturing and logistics. This is a video of Ocado's warehouse. You know, Ocado are famous for their highly automated use of technology to do their packing, etc. etc. This, I think, is only the beginning. You know, Bev's mentioned some of the challenges of Old Oakham Park Royal as a physical space. Some of those challenges are caused by what you see right here: big articulated lorries needing to come into loading docks, needing to turn around, etc. If we could get, you know, electrically powered, smaller scaled, more intelligent transport technologies, if we could improve our aggregation points so that the logistics make more sense, there's huge benefit to be had from all of that. One of the consequences of all the online marketplaces that I described is they have driven an increase in complexity in the transactions that we perform. And if you think of a simple example to make the point, 20 years ago, think what happened if a group of people went to a conference in Las Vegas. They would tend to arrive on chartered planes. They tend to be booked into a small number of hotels in big groups. There would be buses to take them from the airport to the hotels. Think what happens now with Uber and Airbnb. That same number of people could quite easily result in hundreds or even thousands of independent bookings of accommodation, independent bookings of transfer through effectively private cars. So it's massively complicated, the logistics of daily life. You know, we all get flexibility and personal service out of that. There are benefits to it, but there are also externalities, obviously. So I think there's huge potential, given the concentration of manufacturing and logistics in Old Oakham Park Royal, to develop some really important technologies that allow the economy to do what it needs to do, but contribute to sustainability, that reduce impact on communities, etc. I think, Olga, if you could move to the last slide, that's the end of the presentation. I was just going to say a couple of words about what we mean by a test bed. In part, the test bed is infrastructure, so it will be providing 5G infrastructure and possibly related technologies such as some augmented reality kits, so that it's easy to set up and test a new product or service there. But it's also a process. It will need to continually attract people with ideas, whether that's businesses, startups, community initiatives, universities, etc., and then support those organizations in getting projects funded, carrying them out on the test bed, and then for the ones that work, helping them to commercialize and you know, develop, scale, sell their ideas. So all of that process is what we're in the process of helping Bev and the team to design at the moment, by engaging with the ecosystem around Old Oakham Park Royal. You know, who are the businesses that might provide access to their facilities in logistics or creative media for entrepreneurs and innovators to come test with? Who are the existing organisations supporting entrepreneurialism and innovation in the area? So we're at quite early stages now. There may well be people in the audience there who it's worth us having a conversation about, but I hope that's given you some flavour of what we're helping Bev and the team to do and why. And I'm really looking forward to a conversation with you all. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rick. That was really interesting. I'm looking at the chat box. We haven't yet got many customers to ask those questions, but well, in fact, one's just coming in. I was going to ask both of you one of my questions whilst the other ones come in the chat. So you said, Rick, about these sort of technologies helping reinvigorate town centres. You know, obviously, Academy of Urbanism, we're all talking about that at the moment. Perhaps if you give us a couple of examples you're thinking of, and then Bev, as a carry on from that question, you know, how that might work in your projects.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the one idea was these immersive reality experiences, whether, you know, it's the cinema of the 21st century, perhaps. It's the new form of storytelling and entertainment that wasn't possible before. And I think, you know, there's lots of theatre companies exploring this rather than tech companies per se. So, you know, understanding those new types of experience, I think, because, you know, experience is what we like. We're doing so much stuff virtually, so much stuff remotely. And, you know, personally, I quite like the fact I'm not getting on a train at such an early hour quite so many days a week, and I'm seeing my son a lot more than I was. By the same token, there are lots of activities just to not as productive and not as much fun done this way as they are in person. And I think that quality of experience is what people will be looking for. And I think these are new technologies that can add to that quality of experience, and it's what people will be looking for. I think another one is just to ask around, where are we going to find the new jobs in the short term? Because if we're creating jobs, if we're creating businesses, then some of those businesses will want to locate in city centres because they want to be close to potential partners. They want to be in a vibrant environment because that's where a lot of people want to work. And I think there's a very interesting digital phenomenon at the moment that might support some of that, which is no code. No code platforms are platforms where you can create an online business that can trade without writing a single line of code. There's a couple of entrepreneurs in the West Midlands running something called Million Labs, which are starting to this, which are helping people do this. And the figures they report for the amount of time it takes to set a business up and the cost of doing so, that they're staggering compared to previous ways of starting a business. So, whereas after the financial crash in 2008, lots of people who lost corporate jobs took a career change into things like carpentry, furniture design, window cleaning, man in a van type businesses, if you like. These days, it won't be man in a van, it will be app on Facebook, apps that people can create that don't need to earn more than £2,000-3,000 a month before you've got a viable annual income. We're not going to find maybe the next Facebook or Google that way, but it could be a way that lots of people start creating jobs and income. So, for local authorities to work with people who can assist in that sort of business growth, combined with people who run things like co-working centres where people doing that might want to base themselves because they want to get out of the house, perhaps that's part of the mix as well.
That sounds great. But Bev, have you got examples that you're working on at the moment?
I think, yeah, the kind of examples, I think particularly that kind of COVID has thrown up, and the idea of us all kind of working a bit more remotely, is that we've had more of a shift towards that idea of the 15-minute city and kind of radical localism. And we've had that shift away from creating perhaps like maybe one big town centre to a number of smaller neighbourhood centres that better serve their local communities. And I think also in terms of the evolution of the high street and the future of the high street, there's that push towards, if a lot more of those kind of day-to-day transactions that we do, the supermarket run and, grabbing things from B&Q and stuff like that are done from home and you just order things in, then the role of the high street becomes much more about an experience and an event and a social interaction. And also it helps combat some of that loneliness from kind of doing everything at home and just having stuff turn up at your door. So it's what are the kind of things that are going to attract people back to the high street to engage in things. And I think a really interesting example of that is the skill sharing platform that we're setting up at the moment. So that allows people to swap skills with anyone on the platform. It was actually set up in LLDC over in the Olympic site about 7 or 8 years ago. So originally it was set up as a community asset to allow the community to kind of network and talk to each other. And the idea is that you put forward a skill. My skill might be conversational Spanish. It's not, I'm horrific at languages. But if anyone wants to buy an hour of your time for that skill, they pay you with one virtual echo, and then you can use that to spend with anyone else in the community. But although this allows people to kind of connect virtually, and particularly through COVID and the pandemic, people have been connecting virtually to share their skills, that whole platform is supplemented with lots of face-to-face events and workshops and social interaction. And that part, the social interaction part, is just as important as the kind of online mechanism and model and platform that allows all of those things to be exchanged, and those ideas and skills and knowledge and all of that kind of stuff to be exchanged.
Yeah, that's really interesting, sort of making the technology, but realizing it's also face-to-face as well, social interaction. So we've got a couple of interesting questions. I was going to go to Andrew Burrell first, and then Pam Alexander afterwards. But are you there, Andrew, to ask your question direct?
Indeed. Thank you, Alistair. I'm maybe a bit, some of these fascinating presentations are probably well over my head, especially the visualizations. But in terms of how this will impact an economic development, I just wondered, is it necessary for the country stroke the city to have such a test bed, such a major test bed? Or do you envisage these happening in all sorts of cities and all sorts of areas? It seems it's that thing, I suppose, really, that things are moving so fast, technology is changing so fast. Do you need the physical site to engage with it?
I think, do you want me to go first, Rick, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy either way, Bev. Why don't you fire off and I'll follow on if I've got anything else to add.
Okay, I think from our point of view, obviously we work in a very tight geographical area, so we want things to happen in our area, naturally. But from our point of view, what we really would like is our testbed is a kind of catalyst for lots of other maybe 5G testbeds, or just a wider 5G network across kind of West London. And we want to share whatever kind of knowledge or lessons or learn or anything like that that we can gather from what we do, kind of pan-London and nationally as well. So we, although obviously we want it in our geographical area, we want it to be able to benefit as many people as possible, and the future of how that kind of technology is implemented and installed and used, and particularly in my case for businesses and for industry.
Thanks, Bev. And, you know, I absolutely agree with all of that, obviously. And I think there are some proposals for national scale test beds. And, you know, I think that's important. But then we also need to reflect local character, local communities and ecosystems. I think this sort of thing is increasingly going to be the norm rather than the exception. I read I won't name them, but I read one local authority's post-COVID regeneration strategy recently, and it pigeonholed the role of digital technology as supporting emerging business. I think if that just hasn't completely overlooked what we've been living through for the past 18 months with digital affecting everything. So firstly, I think this is going to be the norm. This is why so many cities are interested and actively developing incubators, accelerators, innovation zones, knowledge quarters, etc. And there's also the fact that they reflect different capacities. So, you know, we've spoken here about the creative economy and logistics and manufacturing. What about fisheries? You know, what about all sorts of other sectors? What about wind farms? So there's lots of other sectors that these technologies apply to that can very well be supported by incubators in different areas of the country.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's good that I know you two are working together. You're obviously both coming at it in the same direction. So we've got a question from Pam Alexandra. I'm hoping Pam's going to come and ask it herself.
Yeah, hello, Alistair. Hello. Thanks very much. Two really great presentations. I really enjoyed them. Partly following on from Andrew's question, I just wondered to what extent we're using jargon that we need to be careful about. So innovation quarters, knowledge quarters, how local can they really be to be sustainable and successful? Or do you need a critical mass which requires us to be a little bit more restrained about how many we can have all over the shop? My personal question was, how are the best test beds going to attract the risk takers and also fund their infrastructure? And how do you see the public-private working together here? And partly because of my involvement with the Connected Places catapult, I was just wondering to what extent the different catapults are really involved in making sure that we share what you're doing in all sorts of places, not just across the UK, but more internationally.
Yes, the catapults are absolutely involved, and Connected Places catapult, I know, has a particular initiative in this area. Won't say any more about it than that because it's still early on from them, but yes, absolutely they're involved and play a role there. I think there are some examples of very highly localized centres that have done great good. The I think it's called the Media Centre in Knowle West in Bristol, for example, set in one of Bristol's most challenged communities, working very locally to create benefit there. I've also been doing work with Birmingham's Knowledge Quarter recently, and that's obviously a much larger place. 45,000 students on site in normal times every day, and the largest teaching capacity in the arts outside London. That's at much higher scale. And then I think also important, as Bev said, to look at regional and national collaboration between these institutions, as we're doing with Old Oak and Park Royal. You know, it's very interesting to follow the HS2 line up and down from Park Royal and what you encounter at the various cities along the way there. So to me, it's like a fractal thing. It applies at every different level. Bev, I don't know if you've got a comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think, no, I totally kind of echo all of the things that you're saying in that. And we are very keen in OPDC in whatever we do to kind of link up and work in partnership with people. So West London Alliance are on our client team to help us look at the kind of sub-regional level while we're developing this idea of a test bed. And actually one of the very early things that Rick said to us was, do you want a 5G test bed or is it something else? And it's like, we just want something around kind of next gen technology or better connectivity that helps our businesses be more productive, that makes our area more attractive, that allows us to share innovation and knowledge with the rest of the country, basically. So whatever that is, we don't mind what it's called. And again, he gave us a presentation the other day, which was like the definitions of innovation districts or innovation zones and how they're all kind of the same thing, but with slightly different name type things. So for us, I think the terminology or the name itself isn't so important, but it's what it's going to bring, what kind of benefit it's going to bring to our businesses and to our area, and that we can spread sub-regionally and regionally as well. So the GLA also sit on our client team, and again, they're really interested in sharing that knowledge across London. And again, the ideas that Rick's talking about, bringing in, connecting us up to Birmingham with our obvious kind of HS2 connection, which we haven't really been able to make yet. If through this project we're able to kind of make those connections nationally as well, that would be fantastic for us.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. So,
Alistair, sorry, I just realised I didn't say anything about Pam's question around funding. Again, you know, this is something we're looking at with Bev. There's no shortage of cash. Particularly private sector investors have trillions looking for a reasonable return. And if you look at the amount of money invested in the technology sector, it's staggering. I think Bev gave an example of a peer-to-peer application. One of those I always think about is peer-to-peer dog walking. SoftBank invested $300 million in a peer-to-peer dog walking app 2 to 3 years ago. It's got all those characteristics you were describing. It creates social interactions, performs a useful service. It's also got a massive market of dog owners around the world, which is why they were happy to pump so much money into it. So I think the challenge is not whether there's enough money around, it's aligning the money to the test beds and helping the test beds to, and their customers, businesses, communities, etc., to develop investable initiatives. And I think that for me is the key. The expertise to develop something investable is the gap that we need to close. That the money isn't the problem, it's there.
No, that's a great answer. What I'm really enjoying about this is, like, I don't know with you, it's just started raining. A raining Friday afternoon. There's so much optimism coming from the screen from both of you. All this optimism is a great way of hitting Friday. So, Brendan Mulligan, you've got a good question. Are you there to put the question yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm involved at the moment, just out of interest, in a new city development plan for the city I live in. And last night we were discussing at a town hall meeting telecommunications and that. And one of the planners at the meeting raised the question about 5G. And there were certain reactions from members of the public about the safety of 5G. I think there's a small cohort of people out there who have concerns about 5G. And I was just wondering, what ideas are there for addressing public concerns about 5G? What's the best way to go about it?
And Brendan, can you, I should know, I guess, but can you tell us which city it is?
It's Galway in the west of Ireland.
I have a fondness for Galway. I spoke at the Arts Festival there a few years ago. It's the only name badge I've ever had that had artiste written on it. Yeah, there is a concern over safety with 5G. I'll say I've looked at the medical and scientific evidence. There is no actual issue with safety with 5G. It's no different than any other form of communications. It's less dangerous than standing next to a pot of instant coffee in terms of the radiation that comes from it. It's roughly equivalent to talcum powder. There's no actual safety issue. However, there is a actually reasonably widespread concern amongst the general public. There is also a very active campaign that I would actually classify as misinformation. It points to supposedly scientific evidence that's either not scientific or actually not relevant to the charges they're making. The secret to it is early engagement. So Liverpool City Council have been very good with this. They've helped DCMS with a lot of DCMS's information. I'm part of a UK 5G working group that's been part of that. So the key to it is engaging, communicating with people, telling them what you're doing and why, promoting the benefits, as Bev and I have been doing on this call, letting people know what's in it for them, and also just trying to directly explain that it's not any different from a television signal or a Wi-Fi signal, and there's actually no danger to it.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with all of that, Rick. And the GLA as well have actually been running some workshops on how to kind of communicate with local communities about 5G. But I think it's also just kind of part of that wider campaign sometimes of misinformation or fake news. And it's how do you combat that, especially when it's so prevalent and unfortunately easily spread by the internet, which is we're boosting. It's hard to kind of fight against that. And I was watching TV last night with my husband when he insisted that I have a night off for once. And there was the film that came up kind of trying to debunk the myth around the vaccine. And it was lots of people kind of talking about how, you know, it's nothing to be concerned about and the scientific facts and all of those kind of things. So it may be at some point, if we really want people to take up 5G or not be so scared of it, we have to think about wider kind of national campaigns like that. But it's a really similar situation. Lots of people have concerns about the vaccine, what's in it, is it safe, does it have long-term impacts or health concerns and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a really similar situation with 5G.
Great. So we've got a few minutes left, unless someone wants to jump in. I think what I've been dying to ask about is when you're showing, Bev, one of your first slides showing the various tube stations that within your action area. I was thinking, I know I've had projects around there. I've been to each of those tube stations. I'm not sure that when I last went, I felt like I was part of a larger whole, and I can see with crossing 3 borough boundaries or whatever. So what, just in terms of sort of placemaking, or I suppose, you know, even place branding, are there things that you're doing that they're going to make people feel like they're part of that sort of new neighborhood?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of the kind of residential redevelopment, there'll be a kind of obvious placemaking strategy around that, which will encourage people to kind of go there. And because there'll be a kind of critical mass of residents anyway, that will naturally create opportunities and reasons for people to go there. I think the trickier thing is with the industrial estate, and particularly the industrial estate kind of, I think, likes to not invite people in because it likes to get on with what it's doing. Businesses like to just keep to themselves, get on with what they're doing and not kind of attract anyone else there. But I was just talking today with one of the consultancies working on our funding strategy about there's a kind of missed opportunity to attract people there perhaps at the weekend. So if we say during the week, the industrial estate needs to just get on with what it's doing, be productive. But at the weekend, we could look at more exciting things to attract people to the area. So kind of pop-up theatres or art installations or festivals or markets or things like that. So at the moment, as I said, we have the Great Places scheme, which has been doing things around creative wayfinding and things like that to kind of attract people, really highlighting some of the heritage assets. So they've been doing walking tours and things like that, which are always fully booked, and it has a really interesting history to the whole place. So we are working on smaller things like that. I think that will probably ramp up a bit more as we get into the actual redevelopment of the residential side though. And hopefully then by then we'll have less of the HS2 build will be easing off, which means it's a bit easier to kind of navigate and get around the area as well.
That's great. So we've really got 5 minutes left. I think Pam's asked another question, which is probably a good way of wrapping up, just to hear from both of you. I'm sure Pam won't mind if I read it out for her. Just so what she's saying, what difference has the last 11 months made on likely demand for jobs and connectivity, OPDC? So we've had all this optimism. Pam's got a little cloud. I'm hoping you're going to set us off at the end of this lunchtime.
I think kind of
It wasn't intended as a cloud, by the way. It was about how the world has moved on a decade in 11 months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of how COVID has kind of affected the industrial estate, I would say, if we start with that. So we've seen some of our businesses have fared quite well. So the logistics sector, Ocado, Amazon, the couriers, FedEx, everyone are doing really well, obviously, because everyone's buying things online. And businesses in the construction supply chain are back to kind of about 85, 90, probably higher than that, higher percent of output at the moment. And with our food manufacturers, so food manufacturers that provide food for supermarkets such as Charlie Bingham's and McVitie's and things like that are all doing really well at the moment. But other sectors are struggling and are still struggling, and it's going to take a while for them to recover, if at all. So, for example, businesses in the hospitality, retail and leisure supply chain, we have a lot of micro businesses that cater for events, and they're either in hibernation or maybe have closed permanently now. And also those in the supply chain for Heathrow as well, because we have a strong connection with Heathrow and lots of businesses that work for them. So the other thing as well that we've been hit with is that a lot of businesses are also struggling to navigate the new Brexit regulations as well, which we keep getting told are teething problems, but those teething problems are really causing a lot of problem for businesses. But on the flip side, so if I try and end on a more positive note, I think one thing that the pandemic has really highlighted is the importance of industrial areas in the city. And how important those are to actually keep the city running, and how we shouldn't just keep pushing them out to the edges, but having them in the city is really important. And also the importance of digital connectivity that Rick touched on before. And I think certainly all of the recovery strategies that I've seen have a real, including ours, I should say, have a real emphasis on clean growth and improving digital connectivity. And I don't think that's going to stop soon, hopefully.
Right. So Rick, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think Bev said almost everything. Just I think I would go back to the point I made around those no-code platforms. I remember about 10 years ago at a family do, a cousin of mine who's much younger had left university, and I said, "Oh, what are you doing now?" "Oh, I've got a job as a character designer for a video gaming company." That job was nowhere on the radar when I left university. No one would have thought of it. No-code is just one example of new jobs that are going to be created by new technologies. And I think looking at those as a really serious part of economic recovery is really important. I'd also echo what Bev just said about industrial areas. I remember a couple of years ago organising a workshop on technology for a major property owner. And they phoned me up the day before the workshop and said, "Rick, have you got someone who's expert on industrial power supplies you could bring to the meeting, please? Because we're starting to see people wanting to undertake manufacturing in some of our retail units." So I think, mixing things up, new technologies, that's the way to economic growth. But I think that's why things like the Old Oaken Park Royal Testbed are so important, because this is all going to be new and businesses and people will need help adapting.
Yeah, no, I personally like the idea that manufacturing, now it's easier with 3D printers and so on, that it should go back to the high street and back to places like your site. That's fantastic. We always promise to end promptly because I know you've all got meetings to go to. So really, it's just left for me to thank both Bev and Rick. Fantastic presentations, a whole new way of looking at all those things. I'm looking forward to next time I'm in one of those tube stations, seeing all that change happening. And thank you very much for attending. Thanks for all your questions, and see you at the next Urbanism Lunch Hour. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.